When we were doing the Necronomicon, that book, and I think I mentioned this in the episode, reminds me of Evil Dead. And I love zombies. I have, this borderline unhealthy obsessions with zombies, zombie movies, The Walking Dead. I was all about that TV show, which I had a very strong love-hate relationship with it. I just wanted all the people to die, like people would just, I'd find them to be so annoying, and then they would finally die. And then they'd be replaced with another equally annoying person. But I've all this.
You mean they didn't just become an annoying zombie? Like great, now they hang around as an annoying zombie.
Tapping them on the shoulder, they turn around. But it's interesting, zombies, they're such a large part of our culture, going back to even the Greeks. I was reading on the history website, history.com, that they would sometimes bury people and put rocks on top of them, seemingly to keep them from getting reanimated and coming back to life and rejoining society. And then obviously there's everything with, Haitian culture and voodoo and just crazy stuff. But I absolutely love zombies. I think there's so much stuff there, and it's interesting that so many other people find such a weird thing so fascinating. The idea of these dead things coming back to life. And it's always humans, unless you're playing Resident Evil, I feel like, but it's always humans that come back. You never really see zombie dogs or zombie horses or anything like that.
It's very Pet Cemetery at that point. Which actually winds up with both varieties, really. All right, so I'll nail myself down. I'll bind myself to this point like I'm a buried dead with rocks on top of me.
With vampires, staking them through the heart, but staking them down, not just in the heart while they're standing or something like that, but actually down into something to kind of pin them as well. And that's kind of interesting. Think about what I was just talking about with the Greeks, the idea of keeping putting the rocks or whatever on them to keep them down, but the idea of the staking the zombie or staking the vampires too.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. We seem to have this fear of the reanimated dead in general. Very interesting.
It also seems like it's interesting that it culturally shifts depending on certain cultural climates and things like that. Obviously there's the magic zombie, right? Something like a person who has magic did something to turn someone into a thrall, or kind of thing, it's or even in the case of any other undead, but versus the vampire undead, the zombie doesn't seem to have it doesn't have the capacity. It's a shadow of a person, versus the vampire is supposedly depending on the mythology, they're still in control. They might even be aggressive in different ways that are manipulative or things like that. And zombies can't really do that. But I also, like you were saying, Dan, I think of weirdly enough, probably even though I knew about zombies and stuff, the earliest two things I can think of getting involved in are probably things stuff in Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, which is you have zombies, but you also have skeletons, which are weird because are skeletons also the kind of undead. They're sort of like zombies, but they're just reanimated bones, right? But they don't seem to have the same, I guess, personality. They don't seem like a person, and a lot of times those are controlled by an evil some type of mage or lich person, that has that kind of thing.
It's there's that greater category of undead, and then
and then zombies are a low tier kind of thing. I was gonna say that I think of also the in media versions of it. I think before I actually saw any zombie movies proper, I remember the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode about zombies, and it's all the parody of the different kind of zombie film. It's that he acts, but that also is magical. He goes to the occult section of the library and he raises the dead. And, he wants to raise up the Lisa's pet cat who died, I think it was Snowball 2 or something, and he ends up raising zombies instead. And
back to that Pet Cemetery.
Yeah, it's back to cemetery. Yeah, exactly. Which I've never seen any of the variants of the Pet Cemeteries.
Yeah, you that's not for you.
Yeah, I don't think
you would not. I don't think I'd dig that.
That reminded me of Scooby Doo. I think that was my first real. Actually, no, it would be the music video for Thriller. Was my first exposure to zombies, but animated would be Scooby Doo, and even then it was probably just Old Man Withers or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't remember like it's weird. I've like even though like Thriller I remember hearing like on like in things, I never saw that video till later. Like I don't like I know it's like long and stuff like that. Like it's like one of those things where like it skipped my like like
That's funny.
it's like well because I didn't we didn't really watch that kind of music video stuff wasn't really around in my house so I never really. Yeah, but actually, in that same Simpsons episode, he's wearing instead of a magic hat, he's wearing a copy of Michael Jackson's Thriller. Like Bart puts it on his head. It's like that's it. So, but yeah, but also I think of like but then like and that variant of like magical zombies to like then like I guess like the just like shambling why did they happen, but I also think of like Resident, like you're saying, Resident Evil. Specifically, I think Resident Evil 2. Like, remember, Dan, I remember you and I like playing that a lot, and especially like Alien and that thing, and like, and that's all like about like a new. It's like that the virus zombie, or like the 28 days later. Like, it's not magic; it's something tech that went wrong, and like because it's like that whole like what happens when like and. Maybe hitting too close to home. The like mass give people lots of people getting sick. Kind of a very
so that's just kind of interesting. So I was thinking when you were talking about skeletons, for instance, and it's basically reanimating the bones, and I was thinking there are.
I just happen to have a little zombie clown.
They're the worst kind.
Sorry, back to skeletons. Back to forget this clowning.
Stop clowning around. So there are, in my head, I'm thinking you have like two kinds of zombies. You have like the slow moving stupid ones, that they grow.
You're shambling zombie.
Yeah. And then you have like the super powerful ones. They might move fast, or they're not quite to that level of slow and whatever. And I was almost wondering, it seems like when it's portrayed in movies, the virus ones, they seem to be the ones that are like stealthy or strong, as opposed to like the stereotypical like voodoo Haitian, where it's like the fumbling around. Interesting idea. Like it seems like you have this divide between like these super powerful ones and not so much. But either way, at the bottom, when you look at it, the zombies are kind of like at the bottom of the reanimated hierarchy. You have like even skeletons. I feel like when you see skeletons in TV shows or whatever, it seems like they are stronger. They can move fine. They wield swords.
Yeah.
But you don't get that with zombies.
Seventh Voyage of Sinbad style.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, that Ray Harryhausen type thing.
Well, it's but zombies replicate. So what's horrifying about zombies? Well, lots of stuff's horrifying about zombies, but a zombie bites a person, they become a zombie. But a skeleton bites a person, they don't become a skeleton. Like they die, or they, crap, how did I get bitten by a skeleton? Like, well, I don't know what happens, but I guess actually I guess also like with a sword by a skeleton or something, but like
skeletons are always
really
magical, right? They're always like a mystical thing. Like they're never like a viral component to like because there has to be some magic holding the skeleton together, right? And making it do it. So it's got to be like some kind of magic user behind the scenes.
But like, what's the difference between like say, okay, so here's the thing with zombies like witch zombie, like there are so many ways of defining it in the ways that it's become, because like, all right, so think about like the demoniac, the possessed person flailing about and kicking, spitting, and knocking shit over and attacking people and stuff. Like, okay, like that's like kind of like some of the freakier zombie type things, except the demoniac doesn't seem to have as much of a focus of killing people and stuff. They're kind of just freaking out and spouting stuff, right? So, but when it comes to a zombie, okay, like you almost have to like say, well, there are these categories of zombie, because you have I didn't see what was the zombie movie with I think Brad Pitt might have been in it. And,
World War Z.
Yeah, I didn't see any of that, but those guys looked fast as hell. And
it's another virus type thing.
Yeah, right. And they were like kind of like they modeled their movement after like ants, and the way they just crawl over each other, and it was like nope. But there's some frightening things to wind it back. Like what's frightening about a zombie is something that's frightening about vampires too, is that both as a person that becomes a zombie and for a person whose friend or whatever has become a zombie or a vampire, okay, is that something this is not my original idea. I heard some commentator on this, but it was something the idea of like something can bite you and you become something that can't control itself and you can't control yourself anymore. And you might go and slaughter your loved ones. Or the loved one that just got bitten might come after you and now you have to do in what is it them? Isn't it them? It kind of looks like them. You know, now we're back in uncanny valley territory and the notion of like a corpse or an android or a is it still a person? Can you do it in? You know, because it's and that's part of the thing. It's like a werewolf is frightening in its own right, and it might do you in. And forget about whether you become a werewolf if it bites you or not. I guess it depends who's telling the story, but forget about that. Forget about that. Just forget. Werewolf is a monster that's going to kill you, you know?
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like a person. So like the struggle is not can I do it in? It's like it's not can I do it in morally. It's like am I going to win if I am? How do I do it? You know, zombie's a different thing. It's got it. It looks like your friend, you know, and that has to wind back a little, and we have to kind of like put the Jack in the Box back in the box for a second and say, where do we get this idea in the West of the zombie? And Dan, you mentioned the idea of the Haitian zombie, which from a cultural phenomenon, the way we understand it to be anyway, would be kind of a slow moving entity because at least the version of this that we're familiar with is this the westernized version of where did the zombie come from? It's, well, in Haitian society, certain criminals or would be punished by society by being zombified, and that would be, and this is contested, but this is the pufferfish toxin, the toxin or something like that.
I think it's tetrodotoxin. That's how it's said. Let's go with that.
Puts you in this death-like state, and then in a culture that isn't doing embalming and things like that, you know, you're buried alive then, you know, and then you're dug up. You're kind of dead. Socially speaking, you're dead. You've been recognized as being no longer part of society, and now you're dug up, and you get variations on this. All this is contested. Given an antidote or a version of a hallucinogen, and then you're mind controlled into living in servitude to a bokor or sorcerer, right? So that's the idea, okay? And now that's contested. Like there are a lot of ethnobotanists that say nope. The zombie powders do not have that toxin, you know, and so,
or even if it works that exactly that way, yeah.
And like, how many does it work successfully on? How many people are just killed in the process? How many successes do you need in order for the story to spread? Okay, but that's the idea, right? So there's this, and then there's the jump across to the living dead, the walking dead, or an actual reanimated corpse. And like, which is really what we've done to it in America. It's usually
like, so our kind of popularity, right, starts with the kind of like George Romero movies, right? So like Night of the Living Dead being that kind of early version of that. Very well. But I was looking at that, like George Romero didn't even call it in the spec. It wasn't until Dawn of the Dead they started calling them zombies. He actually called them ghouls. When I pulled up, there was a thing where it said something like he based it on I Am Legend. And from what I remember from I Am Legend, the book, it's like they're kind of like basically there was like a nuclear whatever catastrophe like thing, and they're like, you know, basically the people that didn't die turn into these shambling kind of almost like vampire creatures, right?
Yeah,
you know, it's
yeah.
like it's a what's the obviously there was a more like not more recent, but like there was a version of I Am Legend, like a movie, but there was also what's the one with the Vincent Price, Last Man on Earth or whatever it is, but they're more like ghouls, and it's like I wonder if there's like an element, especially in our version, where it's like this xenophobia of it, like, but it's not just xenophobia, fear of like, say like foreigners, but like literally fear of other people, like it's like when other people become like the mass, thing that's coming to get you, whether they're some kind of ghouls or some kind of thing, and it's just like, and it's this kind of like very strange kind of thing,
wow.
So
it really does jump those things. Okay, so the ghoul, it's a flesh eating corpse.
Yeah.
It's a cannibal corpse.
Right.
That then forms a metal band. But it's a flesh-eating corpse. So that makes sense.
I think it was in Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel in the the Christian Bible, talked about zombies in some capacity, and I can't remember exactly what it was. Something about like. Moved without but had no breath or something like that. It's like a very short quip, I guess. And then similarly, you can think of the story of Lazarus could quite possibly be our first known zombie.
And then maybe a couple after that, maybe very, very strange. And yet, I mean, it's okay. So like, if you go back again to the idea of the dead and our relationship to the dead, he's going back again. We were talking about the Necronomicon and necromancy in general, calling things up in mirrors. We've got this old kind of.
There also is an element of fear of, and maybe this was a thing that was more common, but the idea of like the fear of being buried alive is also a weird thing as well. Like that, like somebody might not be dead, like that they might still be alive. Like that whole like putting bells on grave. Is like the idea that like someone could ring a bell, inside the coffin and say like I'm still alive. So they were still alive, or like the obviously that's the whole like vampire like thing. But I mean but that's also just like. What about like the whole?
It's so creepy.
What about also like? Could potentially like our like notion of like, obviously this probably isn't anything that's actually related to actual Egyptian culture. The mummy, coming back because like, the mummy's kind of a shambling zombie because it's like they're not the afterlife person. Is really like it's like something that went wrong or something, or like they're out there to curse people for disturbing their afterlife. Like it like comes back, like it's like kind of like almost like they're like a personification of the like the dead pharaoh's spirit, or it's like almost like a version that's like a protector to protect their tomb, from raiders. It's like,
and that's like its own little thing because like I wonder how much of that comes from just the idea of the cursed tomb.
Yeah,
and like the revenge from the dead. Like how much of it was like from anything from that culture, and how much of it was like weird things that like because if you think about like archaeologists and things, they were just like rich hobbyists. Like they weren't any, they just went and did this stuff because it was like an entitled culture with money and free time.
That could run around the world, digging up people's sacred sites.
I'm just gonna dig up their graves for my own curiosity.
To be honest, it's like before like Western, before like more like further, I guess like empirical Europeans or wealthy, Americans or whatever, started like robber barons started doing those kinds of things. The Greeks themselves did that when they took over Egypt. Like the tour.
I guess it's a time-honored tradition.
Tourism to those sites, like are like there's like predated the Roman Empire. It's like so it's
like
things
where,
like that.
Where was fear of the dead when you needed it?
Yeah. You think like but there was like, but if I'm not mistaken, there is something like, and maybe that's a different. Maybe curses is for a different topic, but like because it's like because the whole like the mummy's curse sometimes didn't embody just like a mummy rising up, but like some malevolent thing that happened to you because you did this.
Yeah.
I know this is also another
Well,
topic you
cursed
particularly like.
treasure, cursed treasure, and that goes into the grimoires and
Yeah.
back to good old Necronomicon again. But let's get back to
Yeah,
zombies.
yeah. Something I was going to say that let's jump into more like the weird modern before we get into like the virus ones or anything like that. Going back to like the Romero, like the shambling, biting zombie, right? Something that I find interesting too is like that even when the zombies are very slow, you think like they just like they. It's like an overwhelming in numbers. Like after a certain point, you can't escape because there's just too many of them, right? Like they don't even have to move fast. It just becomes like you run out of ammo or you run out of supplies or you're just stuck somewhere and you can't get out. And now like you're kind of there, like you're trapped inside a mall. Like and then the zombies eventually get in or somebody messes something up and the zombies eventually get in. But there's always like a very slow, overwhelming thing where like it closes in on you.
There's
Right?
this
The interesting thing with
inevitability.
that. Go ahead, go ahead, go
You're
ahead.
dead.
That's all I had. Yeah.
So the interesting thing with that, it's like, and invariably, this is how, and I'm sure it's all like for cinematic effect, but you'll have a particular movie, TV show, whatever, and they'll be outside, or it doesn't matter where they are, and they're looking all around, and the place is seemingly deserted. There is nothing there, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's like 3 million zombies.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's not like a lot of times it isn't like you have like the 1, the 2, the 3, but it's like all of a sudden it's like it goes from like 0 to a million in like and I'm exaggerating obviously, but in a fraction of a second. It's very rarely that it's you see you are walking and like it gradually increases. Just all of a sudden it's like boom, they're all there, and it's usually all quiet too. You don't hear them.
you know why, right? It's because Cannibal Corpse was playing. They just finished a set and they all came out for a snack break.
One of my favorite movies, like Shaun of the Dead. This is a play on the Dawn of the Dead, like in the mall type of idea, but like in the very beginning where everyone's kind of doing their things anyway, and it's all like routine and patterned. And then when the zombie outbreak happens, Sean, he goes back out to his normal routine and he doesn't even notice because it's just like everything's kind of the same. Like the people are kind of engaging in the same behavior. And so so aside from like a fear of the other, you're getting into like this fear of just like social like stagnation, capitalism, or that kind of like that level of just like everything's the same. It's just like
so this plays back in, and I can start to see a little more how these things are connected. All right, so I Am Legend, right? Mm-hmm. Night of the Living Dead, inspired by I Am Legend. All right, the inevitability of the encroaching invasion. Body Snatchers, all right, right? The Body Snatchers.
It's like some Red Scare type thing.
They Live.
Yeah.
Dark City. There's like this weird, also this isolation. Danny C was just talking about they're nowhere. There's nothing. It's empty. You're alone, and then all of a sudden, if you think about, that's very much the feeling like Dark City. It's like you're alone in this empty world. And then here they are, these creepy, uncanny valley-esque kind of things, are suddenly there. And is there any escape? The Matrix, in a similar way, it's like there's this, you are so outnumbered. You are so outnumbered. Can you win? And I think that's the thing that really factors into the zombie story as what it's become, in a way that it hasn't happened with the vampire story. Like you don't really have like a lot of vampire. I don't know if there is a vampire story where it's like you're the last one standing and everybody's become vampires. I think because vampires have to keep a certain equilibrium.
Maybe 30 days.
Because they have to continue to feed on things that have blood. Yeah, 30 Days of Night is that's probably
that kind of like, or maybe like somewhere in like the Blade true, like the Guillermo del Toro Blade, where the weird super vampires that are more like, again, they're kind of more like mindless, like 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 it's they have the crazy, they can even kill. But also, but I think what it is in current context something where like the difference from vampires, even going back to Dracula to some degree, there's something like cool about vampire. Again, they have agency, and like, and if you
they've been around for a while, so they know they have all the lines.
It's like a mystical, cool. They often are rich or they're powerful. And what's something that
on so many things.
What's something that and it's not saying what's something that people who are rich and powerful, they don't want other rich and powerful, like you don't. So you're not going to want a ton of vampires everywhere doing things. Yeah. Plus, if as a vampire, in like depending on which of the like the kind of movie or mythos types things you're getting into, like. Then you're cutting off, like, if everyone's there's no more, you can't eat people because there's no more, it's like you can't have, everyone can't be vampires, they can't spread, it's like, where zombies don't have a choice, they just do, they're just an actionable, like thing, like they're just like a force, like it's like similar to a disease, and that's probably where the whole disease, like thing, like that comes into like in Resident Evil series, it's like the T virus and it mutates and changes and different things happen as the series goes along, but it's like that whole idea of like, but it's this corporation and things go out of control and then we now zombies, right? It's like
so let's stick with this for a second. So imagine this scenario, okay? And I can't help but think of like recent history with COVID and everything like that. So imagine a scenario where, you have everyone ultimately becomes a zombie. Everyone gets bitten, whatever. There's nothing left for the zombies to eat. Okay, so maybe they can eat other zombies. Maybe they cannot. Maybe it lacks the nutrients they need or whatever.
Like deer or something.
But do you think, well, even let's say all living things are gone. They're all zombified. Do you think that perhaps the virus would then mutate so that it doesn't need living things anymore? Would they all of a sudden become vegetarians? Would they, develop photosynthesis where they just need the sun? What happens at the end when every living thing becomes a zombie? I don't think that's ever been addressed anywhere in pop culture of any kind.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would imagine like there's something of like, well, that kind of belays the thing that makes it scary is being, like you said, like Chris, like the whole like isolated, like alone but amongst like this thing, like you're the inevitability of your own it's like literally the walls closing in around you, because once everyone's no one's here to care about being, it's like they probably just would all like if it's a virus, I would imagine it just like ends, it's just one of those, or mutates to something less aggressive.
It's so interesting too, going back to, talking about animated skeletons and vampires and zombies. It's interesting. It reminds me of any video game or any role-playing game where you have like the creatures are all well balanced. There aren't any really super creatures out there. The vampire is very charismatic, and can shapeshift and can fly, but can only come out at night. And crosses will keep it away, and holy water and garlic and all these things. Zombies are slow moving, but if they get you, it's like it could be the end pretty much, because they do seem like they're pretty strong still, based on what I've seen in movies and whatnot. And skeletons similarly, it's like they're animated, but you can still fight them off. It's like fighting anything else. You don't have to worry about it necessarily biting you or scratching you and getting disease. It's, as long as you can hold your own, you're going to be okay. If you can get into another room and close the door, it seems like, and barricade it, it seems like you're probably going to be okay. Whereas zombies are breaking windows or like breaking through walls. So it's interesting that it seems like you have this well balance across these different animated undeads. Really, really cool. None of them are super, super powerful. They're powerful in their own ways, or their own weaknesses.
Yeah, maybe a lich would be like the high powered thing because they get to be both undead and magic and control. And
Yeah,
phrase
because at its
undead.
core, Lich is like an undead magician, essentially,
Yeah,
right?
like an I guess like an archmage type thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, so at least in the fantasy role playing game idea, right? Usually,
So if
like
you're going to be an undead, I would go for lich.
yeah,
Even over vampire.
even over sexy vampires.
Yeah, because you have magic. Vampires
yeah.
don't necessarily.
Well, vampires have some magic depending on the thing. Like
Not
you
as
might,
much as a lich.
yeah, that's true. But liches don't look very good. And
With magic, it doesn't matter.
yeah, also liches are kind of like they're aren't they like kind of warped by like like whatever they did, demonic pacts or something like that. Yeah.
So
Probably, but you're probably pretty warped as a vampire.
Vampire, yeah. All these are better than zombies. So maybe, yeah, and also maybe that's the other thing. It's like you don't want to become a zombie. That's the whole thing. It's like maybe you already are now.
Back to Shaun of the Dead again.
Yeah. It's
So why do you think zombies are so prevalent in our modern culture? All like The Walking Dead. I'd like to use that as an example. It had like I don't know, like 10 seasons, 11 seasons, something like that.
I think like multiple spin-offs that are still going on.
Yeah, but you don't get that same level of commitment for other, monsters, we'll say. In the 90s we had, Buffy, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That was a big thing.
Vampires
And
hold their own pretty good. There's always something coming out. Like we just had a remake of Nosferatu, that came out. We just had that movie.
Yeah, that looks pretty wild.
The movie Sinners is about vampires that just came out. That was pretty, and then you always have like the Twilight saga, like all that. Like they gotta hold their own still too. Like in the same I feel like it's like probably out of the two undeads. Those are the things. Skeletons aren't getting lots of love, unfortunately.
Yeah,
nor are liches.
Like the screaming skull, but then it wound up not really being a screaming skull.
Yeah,
I guess it kind of was, but it was kind of that guy.
Yeah, it's like I feel like sometimes skeletons get thrown in for comedic effect, or something like that.
Yeah,
it's
yeah. I mean, like skeletons haven't really been around so much since the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
Yeah, there's
it's like sword and sorcery movies. And,
it's definitely a sword and sorcery
maybe if there have been, I haven't seen the Dungeons and Dragons movie they made the other year. I don't know if any skeletons showed up in it or not. But.
No, not that I remember.
think so.
Yeah, and also
Evil Dead. Army of Darkness, rather.
Army of Darkness, that's but again, in the weird sense, that's sort of a sword and sorcery movie,
and it's
like
back to zombies again.
Yeah.
So and magic books. All this stuff is connected. Should we talk about? I mean, I guess it goes without saying we probably wouldn't want to encounter these things. Should we do our monster measure vote?
Yeah.
Sure.
I'll start it off.
Go, Dan.
So recognition. I feel like everyone knows zombies. There's no
back to the ancient Greeks.
Yeah, if you've been around since ancient Greece, you're familiar with the idea of zombies. I think they can be kind of scary. I feel like depending if you're dealing with a 28 days later zombie or like a slow-moving, grunting zombie. I feel like it might have a different level of scariness. But I feel like generally speaking, I think they're okay scary. Maybe like I'd give them maybe like two zombies, two monsters and like a torso, I guess. Are they real? I mean, seemingly from Haitian culture, it seems like something like that may have existed at some point. Not to the extent that we really think about them today. So I'm going to go with maybe like a monster, maybe throw in a torso there as well. Would I want to encounter it? No, but if I did encounter a zombie, I think I could hold my own, and that's saying a lot. I think
that's the pitfall though of every zombie movie. Like you have that hubris of I could probably survive the zombie apocalypse, and it never happens. It's all
Trying to remember that Seinfeld quote when with the peaches is like that was like Humphrey's downfall or something like that. So that's my take. Who wants to go next?
I think obviously, yeah, recognition. I agree with you, Dan. Like that's like zombies have, especially in our like current society, we have lots of iterations. It's generally always in media. Maybe not quite as popular right now as it was, say, like 5, 10 years ago when it was like really, really popular. But it's always in video games. It's always in, it's always in something. Like, there's like, so I think, yeah, that's a pretty good thing. Yeah, scary. Yeah, I think, I mean, yeah, zombies are like, they're scary because of like the implications of them. It's like they're just like, it's just like this kind of, yeah. Yeah, so I think just that whole like the crazy mob closing in on to get you is frightening, and just frightening too. Like you don't want to become a zombie, like that's scary as well. Like you don't want to like, I don't know that you would know after that happens, but it's just like it's like maybe fear, just generally fear of being killed by like the thing, and yeah. So and as far as encountering, yeah, obviously I don't want to a zombie encounter. I don't think anyone would want to be. But yeah, I think it's, as far as figuring it's real. Like I agree with you. Yeah, there might be like some variant cultural things where whether it's people being accidentally buried alive, that might have happened like 2 times and then it spun out, or it's rooted in other cultural like religious practices and things like that. But yeah, but as far as like the mass Romero like shambling hordes, I don't think I wouldn't say that's a thing. Nor I don't think it's something that we should have. I would say, yeah, I mean, I'd give zombie like like good like 3 out of 5, because it's just because the implications are the world is over already. You're right. Once the zombies hordes happen, and that's pretty frightening because you're already in survivalist apocalypse. And yeah, I'm not the survivalist type, so I don't really want to. I like generally the society's modern convenience. I don't. I'm more of the wait for this whole thing to blow over kind of. So yeah, 3 out of 5 monsters for me.
I'll weigh in on this now. I was having problems finding my little checklist here. I was like, all right, here we go. So recognition. I think I'm in agreement with everybody. Like the idea of the Walking Dead, the animated dead, is very well spread and well feared. Yeah, so recognition wise, it's all over the place. And in like, at least in the States, I mean, like you'll see all over the place things like zombie apocalypse vehicle, like the notion of like the zombie apocalypse or training for the zombie apocalypse. Like it's enough a thing that like everybody kind of has a sense of the zombie apocalypse. And I think in fact the zombie is like linked in with apocalypse, in many people's heads, So recognition, yeah, I think that's an obvious one. Is it real? So there is the Haitian phenomenon that was probably real. Who knows what it was, because everybody, there's been a lot of speculation over time of what is the culprit behind it all, whether it's this toxin or whether it's something else. We didn't really get into the idea of, do the dead ever come back? Do the dead ever come back? But and if they did, is it still a zombie? Which I'm going to jump over into the I guess like how scary is it? Is that our next thing?
Yeah.
I'm going to say like I realize I haven't been given these monster ratings. I'll just give it.
Well, you just give one at the end. I think
I messed that up in the beginning. I forgot we switched it over.
You've got extra monsters for all monsters for everybody. All right, so scary wise, yeah, every version is scary. The scariest for me, probably if it's not like the Haitian cultural one of just being like trapped in a body but not able to do anything about it. Like I think I'd just rather get eaten alive by cannibal corpses, but like but the idea of the Evil Dead type zombie to me is scarier than all of them because they're both like the scary, frightening dead thing, and there's that mental torture thing going on too, because they're kind of ghosts. So they're a different kind. Now I don't think they're referred to as the Evil Dead. They're not referred to as zombies. But in this big net of zombies, are they zombies? If so, I'd say they're the most frightening of all. And do I want to encounter them? No. No version of any zombie do I want to encounter. Now, that may be funny because, I was on the fence maybe about Bloody Mary and like all these the other creepy demon-y things, but the boogeyman, but no. Under no circumstances do I want to encounter any version of the zombie unless it's like, I don't know, just like a fake zombie, like someone in a zombie costume. Like when people go on like zombie crawls, like pub crawls, some of them I wouldn't mind encountering if they're cool. But no, I think I'll just say no. Total monster frightening rate. Was it 1 to 5 monster?
Yeah.
Maybe like if it's an Evil Dead zombie and a monster head. They're pretty scary. That's pretty scary. Because they got
one thing we didn't mention, and I definitely want to ask this, and I want to encourage anyone that is listening or watching this to also add a comment answering the same question. So think about all of a sudden the world goes to crap, and there are zombies out there. Okay, you're in your house, not necessarily your house, but like an average house. Okay, what is the best weapon, the best thing you can use as a weapon in fighting off zombies and that you can get from an average house? So no like flamethrowers,
samurai swords.
No samurai swords, but from an average house, what is the best thing you can use to defend yourself against a zombie? Who wants to go first?
Ooh.
Well, I mean, it's so average house, probably something from like the tool shed, obviously, right? And you want something that has a little reach. I'm thinking like, yeah, a really good snow shovel might be a good, or just a shovel, would be a good, like your standard spade. It's almost like you kind of can get a little spear action going on, but you also got a nice broad flat pink, to knock them in the head.
I'm kind of thinking I'm going to go Beavis and Butthead style, and I'm going to say hairspray and a lighter. Just you can definitely do yourself in with it. You have to light first and then spray. Don't do this at home. According to Beavis and Butthead, you light first and then you spray. So there you go. Also, if they use eyes to track you, actual spray paint might be good. Because if you can spray paint in their eyes, you can avoid them being able to see you. If that's how they, But it really depends. My answer for everything is always it depends. But I'm going to go with those. So I'm going with both things being spray items. And then when you're done, as a last-ditch attempt, you throw the empty can at their head.
Yeah, you're gonna run out real fast on that.
Maybe, yeah. Well,
maybe hook up a propane tank or something.
Well, good luck with your shovel. I'm saying spray. I'm saying a lighter and some Aquanet, the big can of Aquanet.
It reminds me of like forming a party in any role-playing game where you have different people have their different skills. You have this person has like the heavy long-distance weapon. Someone else has like the quick, light weapon that can be used multiple times and quickly. You definitely want to partner up with people so you can definitely have different types of weapons.
Like, screw this, I want the yo-yo.
Yeah, I don't know what I would pick. Because like that, I would want something that's that you can use quickly. So like something, a knife, you know, is very quick. But you want something that's distance, like a shovel, and that has some mass to it as well. But you also don't want something in my head that's like has limited supply. So you know, like you were saying, the spray paint or something like that. So I don't know what I would pick.
A knife can get stuck, you know.
It can, and you don't want that. You don't want that. So I might have to go with something like that, a shovel or a rake or something as well. Something because like that, the distance. I know I'd probably, you know, and I didn't say this, but I'm going, since I asked the question, I'm going to add this on. You know, maybe have like something else on my belt. You know, maybe like that, a knife or something as a last resort. Something I can use when the shovel gets stuck or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and something worth noting that you want to think about this for different zombie scenarios. So people in the comments, what would it be depending on the zombie scenario? Because like a gun would be pretty good against. And actually, a lot of houses have that. You know,
yeah, but then you gotta like remember.
That's gonna run out too. Yeah.
Like, and then what are you gonna do? You gotta, yeah.
Yeah, but a shovel's only gonna. It's not gonna work if it's It might not work if it's an animated corpse because it doesn't care. Honey badger don't. What's anyway, yeah, like, you know.
Well, we have to also get. I mean, I guess the question would be like, what's the way to defeat it? Traditionally, right, is smash them in the head, and that usually takes the zombie out for some weird reason. Like as long as you get that, that's the taking out their arms or legs doesn't really stop them, but taking out their head for some reason usually is the thing that knocks them down.
Yeah,
you just got to make sure. You got to make sure that if that's the criteria.
Yeah, and that suggests that they're not animated. That suggests that they actually have some, like it all stems from the brain.
Right. Versus the Evil Dead ones, they can become. It's the evil that gets in you. So your hand could become animated and try to kill you.
You know, this could be kind of a fun game. So it's a zombie. It's a zombie game.
Yes.
You have to pick your equipment and your character. But you don't know what kind of zombie it is.
You don't know what it's like.
So you might go for zombie. I'm going to go for like the baseball bat. But it's Evil Dead type.
Perhaps we'll also have to revisit this. Maybe we'll have to revisit a game where it's all about like how to defeat what household appliances are best suited to defeat this terror. Well, obviously, in the case of the mirror thing, you just need something to smell.
This should become one of our regular questions. If you're in an average house and you're fighting against this thing, what's your best bet?
Yeah.
Well, I think in this scenario too, I think you'd also add, where are you? Because if you're in a hallway, a shovel is not a great idea. But if you're in a graveyard, for instance, I just happen to be, walking around communing with nature and zombies are there and you pick up a shovel, that could work.
Yeah.
Or a backhoe. No.
Yeah. You're in your average cemetery, or what do you use for?
Yeah, definitely a backhoe. It's slow. Yeah. It's also slow moving like the zombies, but you could just crunch over them.
Like in a house, most weapons are a bad idea because if you're using the spray paint or
like the house
if you're using the hairspray and lighter, you set the house on fire. If you're using a shovel, you're going to be smashing the ceiling and you're not going to be able to wield it. In that scenario, you'd be better off with like a pot from the kitchen. Just like it's short, it's sturdy. You don't need to be super accurate. Like it's not going to get stuck. But like if you're out in the world, you're gonna want that shovel instead because like otherwise it's like like a saucepan, like
Well, hopefully your pot is cast iron of some sort, like a nice
or at least like stainless steel,
something that's got a good whack, pink.
Makes a good sound.
Maybe like a 2x4. Like if you have one,
like cast iron it's heavy and hard to swing. Choices. Yeah, you have your choice of kitchen gear. What's it gonna be?
You can't
All
sign.
right.
Maybe you could layer it on and have a little armor going on too. You know, like strap it to your chest.
That's true, especially for and if they teamed up with skeletons, you might need that because that would have swords.
Yeah, skeletons always have swords for some, or shields. You know, which is weird because why.
And they're likely to team up with zombies because they're naturally resistant to zombie attacks. Zombies don't find them very appetizing.
What if you had a zombie dog? Would that?
They would not team up with skeletons.
Yeah, they would have.
They have a conflict of interest.
Now, if we get into skeletons, can we do dinosaur skeleton?
For audio-only listeners, I'm wearing a Jurassic Park shirt.
Dan, you mentioned being out in the graveyard, and that seems to be going back to the, thinking of the original Night of the Living Dead. Zombies just somehow come out of the graveyard for some reason. Yeah, maybe we should next time let's talk about scary burial sites. So,
I like that.
Graveyards.
Graveyard.
I guess pyramids. Like, why is it like,
it goes back to that.
Henges? Why are we so scared of? That's like weird because we have them. We've always is a ritualistic burial is something we always seem to do. But why are they so? Why is it so creepy?
Is it because they used to come back?
Yeah.
Maybe embalming actually is not about anything but keeping them from coming back.
I guess hopefully, like in a weird sense, some people want they might want you to come back. So like, I mean, that's the whole point of some of this, right? So yeah. So let's maybe we should talk about that.
Graveyards in our future. And in our future discussions, but also maybe in our
well, potentially, yeah.
Depending.
I might be more for the cremation.
I'm more for the lich thing.
The lich thing.
I just gotta hang around. I'll be going on tangents forever. But I just won't look quite as cute.